introduce Brian Hitchcock, our speaker for today's event. Mr. Brian Hitchcock is the VP of Science, Policy and Learning, and Executive Director of the Global Food Traceability Center at the IFT. Brian's insights and expertise are essential to helping IFT better understand and support the global food system. He also serves as an IFT Senior Scientific and Technology Leader on critical science of food initiatives. Brian has extensive product and process development expertise in the food and beverage industry across emerging and mature brands. He spent much of his career at PepsiCo in various R&D, product and process development roles, most recently as Senior Director, North America Nutrition. Prior to PepsiCo, he worked at Procter & Gamble and 3M Company. We very much looking forward to hear Brian's talk. Spencer, our former chair of NYIFT, who liaised with Brian for this event, would like to make a quick comment before we open the floor to Brian.
Well, thank you, Sophia. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge Brian's ability to stick with us. I think Brian and I talked maybe October 2020 about this presentation, and with all the dips and turns and everything else, we managed to plug it in for today, a year after our original intent, but thanks for staying with us, Brian, and glad to have you.
I thank you, Spencer and Sophia. I really appreciate the warm welcome and the opportunity to come and join the group today. It's been a little while since I've been in the New York market, but as a former New York section member, it's wonderful to be back and talk with you via this virtual platform. Would have loved to have been in person, but we'll mark that down for a future date, and I can come back and see you all live. So appreciate the opportunity to come and spend half an hour, 45 minutes or so with you talking about a topic that is dear to my heart, and that's really about food traceability and what's going on in that space. So why don't we go ahead and jump in on that. So first, what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background on why IFT, and I'm an IFT employee, a staff member. Why does IFT working on this space? What is our role and what have we been doing? IFT has been active in the traceability space for 14 years. And that goes back to a partnership that we had with the FDA and task orders that were generated from the FDA to IFT to convene stakeholders around this topic and get a sense of what the lay of the land was, what the capabilities were as the FDA was preparing for the Food Safety Modernization Act. So it was a series of contract and grant work with the FDA that then led to the creation of the Global Food Traceability Center in 2013. And we've been active in this space ever since on various different commodity spaces, projects, program works, grants, and other things. And you see a list of things there that we do. We develop standards against multiple use cases. We're very active in seafood traceability. You'll see a series of communications from IFT on our platforms under the tagline GDST, the Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability. We develop best practices and guidance documentation. You'll see a series of those on our websites, and they're in published types of forum, and there's a picture of one there on the right. We develop tools to help people learn about this space and to implement traceability systems into their organizations. We bring people together, and both on a technical and business type of level. We conduct pilots and those types of things. Plenty of case study resources available there as well. We do quite a bit of education, training, and convening workshops, and going out and doing talks like today, which are really foundational type of knowledge setting around this topic, why it's important, and what all is going on there. And then lastly, we do a lot of communications and outreach type of work. So you wanted to convey to you that as IFT members, you have a resource going on that is active in this space on the science and food professional area, and that we can be a resource for you.
Okay.
I don't know that I'm not.
I know that
seeing
I was
it.
getting a little bit of background noise there.
Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked
Thanks.
like Jerry got, okay, sorry. Just
Working
want
the
to make sure
phones.
that, not a problem, it's state of where we are today. So for our talk today, I wanted to identify four core takeaways for you. Establish some foundational traceability concept awareness, particularly around key data elements and critical tracking events, some of the terminology and things that you'll hear in the space. What do those mean? And so you have an awareness of that. I want to go in and spend a few minutes around the traceability rule that the FDA is working on and will be coming out later this year. I want to talk about what organizational roles and responsibilities of those who are impacted by that rule and what you can be doing now to get started in anticipation of that rule finalization. And then lastly, show you some of the resources that are available from NYIFT to help you in this type of space. So why don't we go ahead and jump in on the fundamental side of things. And when we do that, I think it's always best to start with a definition. And so you'll see the paragraph in blue there, and I'm going to go ahead and read it because it's a definitional type of thing. But traceability is the systematic ability to trace the path of food ingredients and/or their finished products associated with those throughout their entire life cycle by means of previously captured and stored records consisting of critical tracking events, what are known as CTEs, and key data elements, what are KDEs. And hopefully that's a clear definition that this is a full life cycle type of program. And you can start in multiple different places depending on the ingredients we're talking about. We go all the way back to seed or farm or fish and all the way through to post-consumer type of disposal of products. So what is a CTE? A CTE is various stages of the life cycle of a product that you can define, whether that be something like a ship, a receive, a transform, a create, a package, a depletion type of event. And then the key data elements that are associated with those, think of those as the when, what, why, where type of elements. You list out those 5 W's that we're all familiar with that are associated with an activity that happens at each of those critical tracking events. With those definitions in place, you can see where you establish a foundation of data that's captured throughout a product's life cycle, and that data can be used for multiple different use cases. And I list 5 of those here on the slide. The first of which many people associated with this is a food safety, recall, quality type of use case, and certainly that's a core element of what traceability information is used for. But there's also other uses, and we find that these can actually be very useful for businesses in justifying an investment in a traceability type of system. Things like establishing visibility into where all of your ingredients and products come from. We're often surprised that people may not know beyond their first tier supplier where materials come from, and this can really provide insights into that full life cycle supply chain visibility, which I think many people have found quite useful here in the last 2 years as they've tried to unwind where everything's coming from, and they have to find alternatives as supplies become constrained and alternatives are needed. That visibility can often drive efficiencies in the systems that are far greater than the investment that is required to build these systems. And then there's more consumer-facing type of language in sustainability and authenticity and marketing messages. Consumers are far more interested today than they were just a few years ago around where their food comes from and what's the journey that it's undergone to reach them, and having that personal connection with their food. So hopefully that establishes a little bit of some of the key constructs that you'll hear. One of the other things I just wanted to mention on CTEs and KDEs, that was actually developed as IFT level work, and so it goes back to that FDA task orders that I talked about. Some of the outputs there created these definitions that have stood the test of time and are now part of the vernacular in folks that are active in these types of projects. So why don't we dig into this a little bit more and show what is a CTE KDE matrix, and this is a high level example. This is not one that would necessarily be actionable, But over the life cycle of a seafood supply chain, from catch through a landing type of event to a process type of event, to maybe that process is done outside of the market that the product's going to be sold into. So there's an import type of event. A retailer or a food service provider may sell that event, and then there's components of it that may be disposed of, whether it reaches a code date or not. So this is intended to show that multiple key steps within the process, where you can identify and capture that who, what, when, where, and why elements. And if these are done at words, there would be a lot of data that would be captured with each of these. So that brings a little bit more to life around what we're talking about for CTs and KTs. So you may look at that and go, well, why has it been a 14-year journey to get from ideation and starting these types of things to now? Why haven't we solved all of this? What's taken so long? So there's really four main challenge areas, and of course we can come up with additional ones beyond that. But here's four. We all look at our individual supply chain answers, and I don't know that I've ever come across someone that hasn't said that their individual supply chain isn't complex and they have a straightforward supply chain. But clearly we are in a global type of market environment. These are integrated supply chains, multiple touch points, multiple players, and that type of thing. There's a lot of different regulatory environments out there. There isn't consistency across multiple agencies, even within a single country, let alone across the globe. There's multiple technology solutions that are in play here, some of which are better than others at talking with each other. And then lastly, these systems that don't come for free, and there's hardware and software investments and maintenance that have to go into these types of systems. So those are some of the things that people are working on out there and trying to solve for. And when you hear people talk about why they haven't been advancing it, these are often the four most common things that people are facing in making decisions. So one of the areas that we've been working on to try to move this pile forward is around that system architecture and them being compatible with each other. And you'll hear the terminology interoperability. And so I wanted to go a little bit further into what that is as a key traceability mechanism. And this is really about how different systems can talk with each other and how they can share information without losing data or having it corrupted. There isn't necessarily a desire to have everyone on the same system. People want to have different systems that are fit for purpose for their business. And so we need those to talk to each other. And that really happens through things like globally unique identification. So that one box of a product versus another box of a product, what those differences are, and they're uniquely identifiable. That there's standards around how we capture that information and that we share that information, and that we're able to have solutions that aren't specific to one one platform or one solution. Today you haven't heard me talk about blockchain or some other types of solutions, and we don't necessarily focus on particular ones of that. We want to be able to enable all of those to work together. So when you hear about interoperability, that's basically the core construct of what that is. And so you can apply that. And then lastly, from a foundational type of principle, standardizing the methodology for creating these types of systems is very important. And one of our key partners is the GS1, the Global Standards One. They are the folks that own barcodes and set data standards around barcodes. We've worked with them to establish a 13-step process around how you create traceability systems, build them, and then deploy them. And you'll see that most of the energy and the more steps here are up, in designing the system, truly thinking about what the scope and objectives are, what business processes are you trying to incorporate and solve for, and then really defining the solution that you're looking to get. We often see people want to jump in and go buy a solution, buy a software platform, and that's going to solve for you. But you have to make sure that you're buying the right solution that's going to be fit for purpose for your need state. All right, well, why don't we move on then a little bit to the Food Safety Modernization Act and Section 204. So Section 204 is a subsection of the Food Safety Modernization Act that was signed in 2011. that requires the FDA to create a traceability system for certain foods. And so it's been 10 years, but the FDA is now actively creating and rolling out that rule. We can get into the timeline and why it has taken that period of time, but I think we can appreciate that some of these take a little bit of effort. And so why is there a proposed new rule? Beyond the requirement of a legislation type of environment to create one, there are some key need states. And the first of which is we often see outbreaks taking quite a bit of time to identify what the food source was, who the manufacturer may have been, or the grower, or those types of things. So the core element of creating this proposed rule is to shorten that outbreak response time, to enable industry and regulatory bodies to be able to identify foods and get them out of trade sooner than what is possible today. And there's elements of identifying what was the impacted food, and then going back to who the manufacturers and stakeholders would have been. So the rule has a couple key elements to it, clarifying and preserving what that transmission of key data elements are, what key data elements are required at certain critical tracking events. This is only applicable to certain foods, and I will get into what those certain foods are, but this is not for all foods and ingredients that are manufactured. And the reason why they're doing that is they went in and did, identified and created models around foods that have a history of outbreaks. One other key elements of this is that, that speed element, and, rather than it being days of turnaround to provide information between impacted parties, there's going to be a requirement for a 24-hour turnaround is what the current proposal is. So this modernizes the data capture and transmission. It recognizes our new digital reality. So much of what is done today is still done on paper. Someone who believes that they may be able to meet the requirements of the rule within 24 hours is going to be significantly challenged. And so this will, incentivize people to embrace digital technology for their records for impacted foods. And then ultimately as we talked about, shortening outbreak response time, but this is really about public health and reducing the incidence and impact of foodborne illness here in the US. So that's why the FDA is working on a proposed rule. Some more specifics around that. The actual name of this, and I think it's important to capture that, is requirements for additional traceability records. So through our normal food safety programs, there's records that are required. This is about additional records, and it's about certain foods. And so they were very clear in the naming of this rule to clarify that. This actually, the proposed rule seeks authority from three existing US laws. We talked about the Food Safety Modernization Act, but we also found it very interesting, the rule that they referenced authority from the Food and Drug Cosmetics Act, as well as the Public Services Act. So the FDA is really articulating that they have a strong legislation backdrop to justify this rule. And we talked about the goals already. So what are the concepts of the rule that are in place? There's a food traceability list, which I'll show you that on the next slide. Basically, this is a list of high-risk foods that are going to be subject to the rule. The rule outlines specific critical tracking events and the definitions around those. There are certain exemptions in the rule for certain small providers. There's a kill step exemption. There's a lot of complexities in the rule, but it defines critical tracking events that everyone will need to be able to capture data against. It also specifies certain key data elements for each of those critical tracking events that will be required to be able to transmit to the FDA. That is not a holistic list that those that are practicing in this area may see as a holistic list, but it's certainly a minimum requirement that the regulation will be expected of. This also sets expectations around program records. If you're a food safety professional, you're familiar with creating food safety programs, creating the document records around what your program looks like. companies and individuals will need to be able to, to show that they have gone through a systematic mechanism for creating a traceability program, what records they're keeping, and how they're storing those for affected foods. And we talked about the 24-hour turnaround. In great level of succinctness, the draft rule was over 200 pages of light reading. And so we'll see where the final comes out as, but this is a nice summary of some of the requirements that the FDA is going to have in place for us. So what were the certain foods and how were they identified? And so the FDA went through a comprehensive research study and created a model that looked at foods over the last 20 years that are more susceptible or higher risks for outbreaks. And there's weighting factors and all kinds of things. If you want to see the actual published academic paper that came out of that study, it is available on the FDA website. But it was a very comprehensive model development that then identified these 16 foods that are listed here. And it's quite a wide range of different types of food categories, from certain types of cheeses, eggs, nut butters, various different categories of produce. Produce is very well represented on the rule. We had some jokes going on earlier in the year when there was some of the onion outbreaks that were happening. They were working hard to get themselves on the final version of the rule or not. We'll see if that plays out or not. And various different types of fruits and vegetables, various types of fish, and then ready to eat deli type of products. And so hopefully all of you look at being experienced folks in the food food system. You look at that list and kind of shake your head and go, yeah, I think from what I see occurring, that those kind of resonate with some of the higher risk profile types of foods. If you create foods from ingredients that are not on the list, then that food that is created would be subject to the rule. If you create a food with ingredients that are on the list, but the food that you create is not on the list, it is still impacted. So say like if you took peanut butter and made a bar out of it, and the peanut butter was an ingredient of that bar is subject to the rule because there was an ingredient that was involved. So that various different types of versions there. All right, and so then the next slide is always everyone wants to hear. So when will this come to be a reality? And so we do not anticipate that the rule is going to be finalized and have a compliance date until 2024. Although that feels like it's a ways out there, it's right around the corner. So how do we get to that type of time frame? So the FDA published the draft rule in September of 2020. There was a public comment period that went through February of 2021. And then from there, we expect them to publish the final rule in November of 2022. We know that because the FDA is under a consent decree. There was a lawsuit by several public consumer advocacy organizations that compelled the FDA to move forward in this space. And so there is a deadline date in November that they need to meet. As far as we know, they are very much on track to meet that commitment. Once the rule is published, there'll be a 60-day waiting period that will then become the effective date. And then within the course of what is in the proposed rule, the compliance date will be 2 years after that 60-day time frame. So if you say they publish it on first week of November, you're into January 2023, and then so even if they're in the end of October for publication date, that's where we get at the late 2024 at the earliest. That may, like I said earlier, this may feel like a long time out there. We encourage folks that to start now. We do not anticipate that the rule is going to be fundamentally different than where it is now. There will likely be some changes, but the core elements of what we believe are going to survive the finalization process. And the reality of this is that there's a lot of information that's going to need to be captured and change that will need to take place in the organizations that are impacted. And far better to get started now than to wait even now the 9 months between now and when the rule could be finalized. So to that end, just wanted to share a few things of IFT resources that are out there to further educate yourself. There's plenty of information and other resources as well, but I wanted to share what IFT has for you. And here's a list of some courses, short format webcasts, podcasts, and then we also have some textbook, a full textbook on full traceability is the first line item, and then there's a chapter in a food safety engineering textbook that we've contributed to. Certainly there's other resources and case studies and those types of things available on our website to peruse, and certainly some contact information, and you're welcome to seek me out, and you can have an offline conversation about your needs and resources that are available there. And then lastly, just a little bit further detail, we do have an online course. It's about a 6-hour online engagement. It does have a capability there to actually build the framework of a traceability plan through a workbook type of exercise for about a third of that time. So if you're interested, that is available resource for you. So that concludes my my prepared presentation. Hopefully that was useful for you and your thinking around what traceability is, what the pending regulatory environment is in the US. Be happy to take any questions or comments that you have now, or you can certainly connect separately afterwards.
Right, is that course free of charge?
That course is unfortunately not free of charge.
Oh, okay, well.
Not everything comes for free, Spencer.
Yeah, but always can't hurt to ask, right?
It can never hurt to ask. But as IFT members, there is a membership discount that comes along with that. And organizationally, if you have organizations that you're looking to train multiple people, we do offer discussions and multiple bulk purchase types of negotiations.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
It's a very interesting talk. I've heard about traceability. It's a flashy word nowadays everywhere, but really I've never realized there's so much nuances and clusters going into implementing traceability program. So we now have opened the floor for Q&As. We have our first question came on. Can I go ahead and ask the questions from the audience, and then hopefully you're able to answer. So the first question is that, how's the new rule different from the traceability addressed in a typical food safety plan?
Sure. And so the new traceability rule goes further than what's required in the base FSMA preventative controls and other areas. So it has very specific requirements at the identified CTEs. If you are fairly well advanced in your current food safety program, you have a very significant head start in meeting the new capability, the new requirements in the rule.
Thank you, Brian. We also have an audience asking if we can. They were late in signing in. I think, Jerry, we will make the slides available for the attendees, right? And who sign up.
Yes, we will. And we also are recording this, so the recording will also be made available.
Okay. I have a question for you, Brian. So
Sure.
You've talked about the program, you've talked about the food and ingredients identified that's going to be in the program. I'm just interested, have you had anyone approach you since you started the program that they're in a business that they wanted to differentiate from other business in the industry and have a traceability program with their products, but the ingredients part may not be in the scope of the list? I'm just curious to know.
Sure. Yeah, fascinating question, because there's questions around what does this mean for organizations that have products that are on the list and products that aren't on the list, and what that will mean for them. And so that, I think there's two parts to your question there. There's what is going to be the communication that people are going to want to take? What claims can they make about their product lines related to traceability related items? And I have a traceability system is probably not the most consumer friendly language. They want to be able to talk about the sustainability elements. We produce, we source our products from a single farm in the Central Valley of California, or those types of claims. The systems that these develop then help them substantiate those claims, and being able to prove to themselves and to others. And there's even some traceability systems that actually put codes on their products that you can then take a screenshot with your cell phone, and it goes to a website and says this lot came from XYZ farm, produced on XYZ date, and be able to get that direct consumer type of communication. We're seeing that advance and being one of the business justifications for putting in what some people view as a cost. Unless you can get value from it other than being a risk planning type of thing, what other values can you get? And we're seeing a lot of activity in that area. The second part of the area that I think that you were asking around is what happens when someone has both types of products. And organizations will have the flexibility, in our belief, to be able to operate two different systems. Whether they choose to do that or not is an organizational decision. What we're hearing from folks is if they have products that are identified on the list and they don't, they're probably going to operate a system that is capable to meet the rule across their entire product line. Because they don't want to run the risk of having a mistake on an identified food or not. And so they're going to go more towards having that capability across. They may take some time to implement that, but they're heading in that direction. Sophia, hopefully I answered your question, but I expanded your question into a second question, I think.
You did. I really like the first part of your answer. I think it helped me understand the cycle and how people approach the question. We have another question came in, Brian. What will be the next things coming from FDA, USDA that we will have to work on?
All right, Noel.
Yeah.
So, the FDA and the USDA are pretty active right now. So the FDA is working on water requirements. They're working on specific requirements for products that are sold to infants and young children, and heavy metal contaminants. The USDA is working on some organic items. The USDA is also working on the baby food type of space. They just published, and we can certainly pull the references, but you can search for them. They just published in the last month or so their projected list, each agency, around what guidance documents they're planning on publishing for the next 12 months. And it's a relatively long list. So hopefully the things I just gave you there are a few nuggets of headlines that we're seeing them work on.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have more questions from the audience who are still with us?
There's another one that came in as well. Right. The question is, can you go into more detail on the kill step exceptions?
Sure. So what is in the draft rule today is for products that apply a appropriate kill step, and this is one of the areas that we identified there was a weakness in the rule, was they weren't very specific around what they meant by a kill step. But basically, products that have an appropriate kill step applied downstream of that application of that kill step will no longer be required to meet the requirements of the rule. And so for, say, a pasteurized product that may be on the list, say a fruit juice beverage, up until the point of that applied kill step, all the requirements would need to be met, and downstream of it, they would not be. required. So whoever applies that kill step would be the last owner that would need to meet the elements of the rule.
Okay, and there's one more. Do you envision additional foods or food categories being added in the future?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And so as part of the draft rule, the FDA communicated a process for adding additional foods to the rule. And so that they can identify foods. They will then go through a public comment type of window where they would publish. I used the onions example earlier that we had a series of things that, you know, they would come out and say onions we are proposing that onions will now be on the list. There would be a public comment period for interested stakeholders to provide input on that. They would then finalize the addition of that food category, and then there would be a 1-year compliance window for that food once it has been finalized. There's also mechanism for food to come off the list. Those are less well defined, but there is, you know, opportunity for that to happen. Although, like I said, less clarity around what criteria would need to be met over what period of time for food to come off.
Thank you, Brian. So we've gone through our question list. Do we have more questions from the audience or who are in the panel list? Okay, so we have no more questions. So we will make this presentation available as well as the recorded speaking available to whoever has signed up the event and who are not able to join the event tonight. And thank you everyone for your time. And thank you so much, Brian, for preparing this presentation and the fascinating program that's in place, and look forward to 2024 when it comes to the finalization.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Sorry I didn't get to see more faces in this presentation, but you know, truly appreciate that you're taking the time to come listen to me talk about this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.